My husband forgot our anniversary for the third year running. Then got defensive when I wasn't thrilled about spending that same evening at his mother's birthday dinner instead. My name is Katie Simmons. I'm 33, and I work in marketing in Austin. This is the story of the year I stopped quietly absorbing being an afterthought in my own marriage, and what it took for my husband to actually notice. Chris and I met in our late 20s, married 3 years ago, and from early on, I noticed a pattern I mostly excused as him just not being a details person. Our first anniversary, he remembered a few days late and apologized sincerely, and I let it go, figuring it was a fluke. Our second anniversary, he genuinely forgot until I mentioned it that evening, and again apologized, blaming a stressful stretch at work. Our third anniversary fell on a Saturday. I'd made a reservation at a restaurant we'd talked about trying for over a year, one of those places you need to book weeks in advance. I mentioned it to Chris that Thursday, reminding him casually, and he said he was looking forward to it. Friday evening, Chris's mother Diane called to remind him about her birthday dinner, which she'd apparently scheduled for that same Saturday. A detail Chris hadn't mentioned to me despite presumably knowing about it for a while. When I pointed out that Saturday was our anniversary, he looked genuinely caught off guard, as if the date had simply slipped past him entirely. Again, for the third year in a row. I want to be fair to Chris here, because he's not a cruel person. But there's a difference between forgetting something once and establishing a pattern where your wife's anniversary consistently loses out to whatever your mother has planned. Especially when Diane, in my experience, had a habit of scheduling things at the last minute in ways that always seemed to require everyone rearranging their plans around her. Chris suggested we could do our anniversary dinner the following weekend instead, framing it as a simple solution, since his mother's birthday only happened once a year and our anniversary, technically, could be celebrated any day. I remember standing in our kitchen when he said this, feeling something crystallize that had been building quietly for 3 years. I told him that our anniversary being movable while his mother's birthday wasn't was exactly the problem, that this was the third year he'd forgotten, and that I was tired of being the flexible one in every scenario where his family's plans and our relationship happened to overlap. Chris got defensive quickly, which surprised me, since he wasn't usually someone who raised his voice. He said I was being unreasonable, that his mother had already made the reservation and it would be humiliating to cancel on her, that I was turning a simple scheduling conflict into a referendum on our entire marriage. I canceled our restaurant reservation myself that Friday night, and told Chris I wouldn't be coming to his mother's dinner the following evening. He seemed genuinely stunned, as if it hadn't occurred to him that I might simply opt out entirely rather than either fighting harder or quietly going along with it the way I had the previous 2 years. He went to his mother's dinner alone that Saturday. I spent the evening at my sister's house instead, and for the first time in 3 years of these small anniversary disappointments, I let myself actually sit with how much it had been bothering me, rather than immediately reassuring myself it wasn't a big deal. Diane apparently asked Chris during the dinner where I was, and when he explained the situation, she reportedly said something along the lines of, "Well, that seems a little dramatic, doesn't it? Families should be flexible with each other." Chris repeated this to me later that night, seemingly expecting me to agree with his mother's assessment, and instead found me even more resolved than before. I told him, calmly, that I needed him to understand something clearly. This wasn't about one dinner. It was about a pattern where every single time his mother's plans and our relationship's milestones happened to conflict, I was the one expected to bend. I told him I loved him, but that I needed to see actual change. Not just apologies that reset the pattern until the next year's anniversary arrived and got forgotten again. Something in that conversation actually landed differently than the previous 2 years' apologies had. Maybe it was because I hadn't just been upset. I'd actually let the evening happen without me instead of showing up resentfully. Chris spent the next several days unusually quiet, and then, about a week later, told me he'd been thinking about it seriously and realized he'd never actually prioritized our anniversary the way he prioritized things for his mother. That he'd fallen into treating our relationship as something that would simply always be there, stable and forgiving, While treating Diane's requests as urgent because she made them feel urgent, he set a calendar reminder for our anniversary that day, 6 months in advance, and made a reservation himself at the restaurant I'd originally wanted to try for a random Tuesday a few weeks later. Since he said he wanted to actually celebrate it properly rather than just correcting course out of guilt, the relationship with Diane has been noticeably more strained since then. Since Chris started pushing back more directly when her requests conflicted with plans we'd already made. She's made a few comments to him about how I've changed him, which he's actually handled well, telling her plainly that he'd changed himself, and that it was overdue. We celebrated our 4th anniversary properly this year, at the restaurant on the actual date. And Chris brought it up himself a full week in advance without any prompting from me. It felt like a small thing, but after 3 years of quietly absorbing being an afterthought, it meant more than I think he fully understood. Sometimes the people who matter most to us don't change because we ask them to. They change when we finally stop making it easy for them not to.